Whatever the colonizers wanted to do, developing a strong civil society and promoting democracy was not one of them. Unfortunately, when Muslim countries and Arab countries, most of them got their freedom, what did they get? They got kings, military, and ex-military. I want to talk a bit about the book and why it's unique, and then I'll refer to a couple of things that are unique about it, but I'll leave a good deal of what we do to the discussion in terms of an opportunity. Why do I think this is important? What's unique about this book? Why do some people praise it? Why did for example, in addition to people like Archbishop Tutu and Karen Armstrong and former government leaders, why would you have the man that headed up the CIA's Bin Laden unit, Michael Shura, and some of you have read some of his work, he's very good on these, say that this is the one book that Americans should read or need to read before it's too late? It's because I think post 9/11 we exist increasingly in a world in which there are forces pushing for polarization. You have obviously the terrorists on the one hand, and the preachers of hate in the Muslim world. And you have the preachers of hate in the Christian world, both religious preachers, the militant Zionist far right, as well as many political commentators and pundits, and we know many of their names. Although it's very funny, when you name those kinds of folks, other people will say, well, nobody takes them seriously. But we also have a battle of experts. If you are your average policymaker, if you're the average citizen, and you want to know what should American foreign policy be like, or what are the root causes of 9/11, or how do Muslims really feel about the West, or about violence, or about terrorism, you're dependent on the experts. And the problem is you can have two experts who've gone to the best schools, both of whom are very well published, saying diametrically opposed things. And so, for example, it's not that there isn't an overlap at times, but if you consider, for example, people like, Bernard Lewis, Martin Kramer, Daniel Pipes, a whole slew of them. I call them the Darth Vaders of the world, or lately the forces of evil, and then usually that gets me on somebody's website when I say this publicly. But since they often refer to me and others in this equivalent language, I decided it's an equal world. And then you have other voices who disagree with them, So what's a person to do? What are they to believe? And they're all talking about what Muslims think. You listen to a lot of discussions, they'll say, well, this is how they view the world. This is the way they think. This is how they regard women. This is how they treat their women, etc. And what is one to do? And here you have the silent majority that is sitting there while everybody in the world's talking about them and what they think. And who does the media focus on? Well, the natural thing, and this is not, it's the fault of the media, but it's also the nature of the industry. The media is about sales. It's about bottom line. It's about impact. And what sells, as a senior Newsweek editor said, is conflict. Conflict situations and conflictual discourse. I mean, that's what draws people. I mean, think about what I call shout TV. You don't really have discussions. You have lots of people who are going back and forth. You always have to have going back and forth, even kind of, almost raising their voice at people, being dismissive, etc. Well, what's remarkable about this study, and there are many polls of the Muslim world, but what makes this distinctive is this is the most comprehensive, most systematic poll of the Muslim world ever done. It's a poll of more than 35 Muslim countries from North Africa to Southeast Asia. It's a poll that depends on some 50,000 one-on-one interviews. These interviews are done in local languages by local people, so people will be comfortable. And it's a poll that grids in terms of age differences, in terms of male and female, in terms of socioeconomic status, in terms of literate and illiterate. As a result, by polling standards, it represents the voices of 1 billion Muslims. Okay? within plus or minus 3% in terms of accuracy. And what does this poll tell us? Well, on a number of things, it goes against the conventional wisdom. On other things, it doesn't, you know. But now remember, you should understand conventional wisdom. Conventional wisdom is not what some of us may think and then say, well, I always knew that. So, you know, the question is, by conventional wisdom, I mean the conventional wisdom, for example, of the Bush administration and its policies and of the kinds of folks I've been just sort of talking about. Let's start with the basic question. Why do they hate us? And the notion that they hate the West because of who we are. Who we are is, and then we put our best foot forward. You know, we're a democracy, we believe in human rights, gender equality, etc. And then you just fill in the other side. You know? And that it's an uncritical hatred of the West. Well, there are a few points to be made. One, I'm not sure if we make in the book, but I want to make right here, and that is there's a difference between hatred of America and anti-Americanism. Hatred of America is by people who are terrorists. Okay, that's a small but significant minority. Anti-Americanism is almost a global phenomenon, and it's not just restricted to the Muslim world. As you know, there were polls last year where people were asked, you know, what do you see as the single most biggest threat to global security? And many of them said the United States policy, foreign policy, okay? So we've got to distinguish between that. But let's look at the attitude towards the West when we look at the Muslim world. What we see, first of all, is that Muslims clearly distinguish among and between Western countries. And so they put the United States and the UK here, France, Germany, and many other European countries on the other side. And particularly, they distinguish between Bush and Blair and the leadership of other European countries. So clearly, there's a distinction. And that immediately, that distinction tells you that, therefore, the so-called clash or differences are not about culture or religion. They're about policy, the perception of policy, the experience of policy. Two, where do we see it? When we actually look at statistics. That is, if you compare attitudes towards the U.S. and Canada, it's like night and day. We call Canada America without its foreign policy. And so you will see high unfavorable ratings of the U.S. coming from a Muslim country. Canada will get like a 3% unfavorable rating, this sharp disjuncture. And you also see that in other countries when you look at the polls. How about the attitude towards the West? Is it that it's simply a resentment of the West, a hatred of the West? Well, to begin with, many Muslims talk about what they admire about the West. So there are things that they admire about the West. What are they? Our technology, our achievements, our work ethic, our freedoms, our rule of law. Okay? Many of them are all the things that Americans would say we admire about ourselves and think that one should admire. Do they resent, many Muslims, many things about the West? Yes. And what are the things that they say they resent about the West? They talk about our unilateralism, our arrogance in the conduct of foreign policy. Many Muslims talk about, in particular, in open-ended questions, when asked what do you resent about the West, open-ended rather than closed questions. They say the denigration of Islam and Muslims, looking down upon Muslims as if they are different from or beneath other people. If you understand this last set of comments coming from a whole group of Muslims, it will tell you, that is a broad base of Muslims, it will tell you something about why the reaction to something like the Danish cartoons. If you feel that your religion and you yourself are seen as somehow different or more backwards than other people, if you feel powerless and humiliated, then how much more so when somebody starts making fun of you in the media? I mean, no matter what ethnic group you'd be. I mean, I'm ethnic Italian. When I was growing up, the idea that the ethnic Italians were looked down upon, and then the idea that you might have cartoons about Italians as slapping women around or being mafia, or, you know, I would have friends when I was in college whose fathers loved to tell me Italian jokes one after the other. You know, a joke is funny when you're coming from a position of power in somebody, but if somebody keeps doing one joke after the other about your ethnic group, especially when they're Irish doing it. I mean, but anyway, I don't want to go there. Most of my students are Irish, or many of them. I do this all the time for the last 30 years. It wakes them up in class.